Okay, Deborah Antinori, who is she? She is one of Brainspotting trainer in the US and also a fellow in pathologist, death and dying specialist, a registered drama therapist and professional counselor, author of Grief and Brainspotting Therapy in the Power of Brainspotting book, and author of Journey Through Path Loss audiobook. So that is from me. Without further ado, I will welcome you. Please welcome Deborah Antinori.
Thank you.
Yes, Debbie.
Thank you so much. I'm so very happy to be here. I appreciate you and Inya asking me to do this. Really, it's a great honor. I love that this is a fundraiser to benefit people in need. There's so much need with the advent of COVID and the many ways that people's lives and their livelihood and all the things that we just kind of thought about in life, that life kind of goes along, all of a sudden it changes so rapidly. So I guess I'll do my my screen share because I'll do my little introductory talk with the, are you seeing my screen here now or no? My PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so here I go and share, and there we are. So yes, so first what I want to do, I have my little opening slide, but I really want to give thanks. I'm moving my little button and nothing's happening. Okay, let's see this way. Up. Here we go. I want to thank Inya and Adit. So here are some lovely pictures of them. I met them in Amsterdam while studying with Damir Delmonte, who you will hear a lot about. I'm really using his work about the brain almost exclusively. He's our teacher and our mentor and has been so good to the brain spotting community. Here's Inya and Adit, and then here's Inya in Amsterdam with Anna Buchheim on the left of the screen, the blonde. She is one of Damir's colleagues and is an expert in attachment. So the last 2 years, Damir's seminar on neurobiology has been on neurobiology and attachment. And she is a wonderful, wonderful teacher and educator and researcher. And then we have our Belgium trainer on the other side of Inya, who is Benedict Leys. So we have a wonderful time studying together, and I think Inya and I sometimes are laughing, taking our notes next to each other. We find some things funny about the brain and just enjoy our time together. So thank you so very much for putting this together. It's just a beautiful, wonderful thing. And then we have, I'm having a little trouble with my, how I move to the next slide. The way I've been doing it when I practice doesn't seem to be working. So let me click again, okay? And of course, thank you to David Grand, who is the developer of brain spotting therapy. So I know some of you therapists who are watching are not brain spotters, but hopefully I can explain just a little bit without getting too far off track about our topic when I mentioned something. So since 2003, David discovered brain spotting and we've been learning about it. I met him in 1998 as a facilitator in my EMDR training. And then already he was modifying EMDR with slow eye movements and called it natural flow EMDR. And this then transmuted into finding a single fixed gaze a spot, brain spot, and brain spotting was born. And now it is, as you see, all around the world, and we're so grateful to David. He is such a generous, brilliant, humble man, and he's funny too. So I may say a couple things, we call them Davidisms, that are funny and also wise. So thank you, David. And then we have Damir Delmonte. And here he is teaching with a very, I don't have as complex a slide as this, so don't worry, teaching us something very complex about the brain. And here he is with his beautiful wife, Mary Marr, and he took her last name when they got married. His name was Damir Lovrick, and he took Delmonte because he thought, why does the woman have to take the man's name? And Mary Mar comes to the trainings, and she is a therapist and works with children, and they're a wonderful team, and I can't thank Damir enough. I must mention that I'm using his slides on the PowerPoint, but you will see in your handout that I just have the text, and his pictures of the brain are copyrighted. So he's very generous to let me use them in this way to teach with you, but he asks that I not have them in print. However, one slipped through, so you will have one slide, beautiful slide of Damir's, and I just ask that please, in respect to him and his great generosity, if you would just keep that for your own education. And I have listed his website and his YouTube channel at the end of the PowerPoint, and it's on your handout. So please visit this. If you can leave a comment, it's very helpful to him on the YouTube channel. And on his website, you'll see that he has videos of the, 2 of the trainings that Inya, Edith, and I have taken, and they are wonderful. They go into great depth about the brain, and I highly recommend your subscribing to those videos. So now we will proceed. I'm thinking there's so much going on with grief, loss, transition in this era of COVID. One day we were having our regular lives, and the next day things were completely different, it seems, or within a few days, at least in the New York City and New Jersey areas. All of a sudden we were to shelter in place. For therapists, we went to telehealth exclusively, though some of us had been doing some telehealth all along. Then the trainings, the brain spotting trainings have come online, and the learning curve with all this tech has been very steep. Just thinking of our clients and all the various professions people are in, how much their lives have changed, their work, either they're out of work or they have to go to work and put themselves in harm's way as doctors, nurses, medical techs, in grocery stores, keeping our food supply and our necessary items available to us. And then we go to the grocery store and sometimes there are bare shelves. And maybe there isn't the money for the groceries, depending on the situation. Those who have experienced a loved one who has gotten COVID and hopefully recovers, but possibly has some lasting effects. And at the Amen Clinic in New York City, they're seeing some neurological effects after COVID. There's so little we know about it. So in brain spotting, we talk about the uncertainty principle, and we are living the uncertainty principle right now. And with that comes so many feelings, the loss of life as we knew it, and the uncertainty when things will return to a more recognizable type of life. And will we ever get back completely what we knew before based on this particular virus and possibly its ability to mutate or a second wave? We don't know. I'm also thinking of, I'm sure you've all heard that we had a murder of a Black man in the United States, and this has spread around the world. So I think everyone is grieving for that man who lost his life, his family, and for Black individuals and people of color and people who are marginalized in any way in any society, that we must do all that we can to reach out, to be educated, to help in the ways that we can, that in the way that we're gathering here and that we share this healing and the ways that we reach out to others and try to understand each other much better. And so, a little choked up there. So now, so looking at grief and the brain in the era of COVID. So it's this new, not so normal. We've heard the term the new normal, which is, to me, this is the new not so normal. So I love the term the assumptive world. Therese Rando, who has written a lot about anticipatory mourning, talks about the world as we know it, ourselves, everyone and everything in the world, just as we sort of depend on each day, each week, day by day. Sometimes one day seems a lot like another. We figure when we get up in the morning, we're going to put our foot on the floor and get out of bed. And I know in Indonesia, I can't remember if it's 2 years ago, but you had 2 earthquakes in very close proximity to each other. So even the floor underneath you, this trauma, this existential trauma, as David Grand coins it, occurred, and everyone is experiencing it in your country. So your assumptive world literally turned upside down, and all the effects, the aftershocks, the loss of life, and the other losses that come along with it, we are experiencing now with COVID. Existential trauma, David Grand says, is a trauma that we all experience in some way all together at the same time, like a 9/11. So the difference, he says, with the COVID era and what we're going through with the many changes in our life is like 9/11 in that we're going through it together, but 9/11, the planes went through the buildings, but with COVID, the planes are still going through the buildings, metaphorically. There are still people coming down with COVID, even though where I am, the numbers are decreasing. But we are in a period of time where trauma shock, another term that David has coined, is something that we feel with, again, everyone is experiencing this, and it's traumatic. And the first phase of grief is usually called shock. The impact of it, where we're frozen, where we can't believe what's happening, and then a myriad, a whole bunch of feelings, everything from anger and sadness and feeling frozen, being confused. He will talk about a time confusion, that all of a sudden an hour goes by, or you forget about a client that you had listed in your book. Sleep disturbances, that people are challenged really at an evolutionarily survival-oriented level, because we could catch this virus, we could die. A good friend or relative could, possibly, and some of you may have experienced this. The way that people can't go into the hospital to be with their family member or friend who is ill and then dying. The changes in funerals. We call them drive-by in the US funerals. People will get in their cars and drive by the church or the home, and we can't congregate, we can't hug each other. We have the social distancing. And we are such social creatures, and we're going to look a good deal at attachment and the need for touch and the need for being with those we love as one of the biggest ways that we feel normal, that we feel good, that the oxytocin, the feel-good chemical, oxytocin and vasopressin, is flowing because we have that warm, wonderful feeling of the loved one close to us. So this has been greatly changed. And so all the survival programs in the brain are lit up, and we're really going to be looking at this, because just as with grief, quote, normal grief, and the time that we have known in the past when someone passes away, or there's a divorce, or there's some kind of big loss that's going on, we can, again, all those different feelings that we may have, emotions, and those survival programs of fight, flight, and freeze that are in our brainstem. So I'm going to move along to the next slide, we'll start looking at the brain. So this is really going to be heavily brain focused. I'm not going to tell you a lot about what I think is a good thing to do with a client who's grieving. I more want to talk about what is and may be going on in the brain of that client that will inform your practice, and some things you may want to teach the client to take some of the feelings of either guilt or is there something wrong with me that I'm having these feelings, or that I'm not sleeping, or that I can't stop thinking about my beloved who died. So the brain is self-organizing. It wants to be in good shape. It wants things to be orderly, but it wants things orderly in a triage of first survival, then homeostasis, and then restoration. So I have a funny little slide next. I always have to get a little humor in. So with survival, our fight, flight, and freeze, if there's anything that the client is dealing with that tells them things aren't quite right, their brain is assessing, the amygdala is an assessor of what's coming in from the environment, how that matches with what we've known in the past on a visceral, unconscious level. We have much of this going on right now for ourselves and for our clients. So we talk about in Brainspotting limbic countertransference, the mammalian brain, the limbic brain, subcortical brain. We are being triggered by our clients unconsciously as they sit in front of us and have many feelings, tell particular stories. We have a history too. So we can have feelings that are of a variety and may signal to us a time to really get some supervision, or maybe even do our own personal work, because we're all kind of stuck in this survival place. Hopefully, we're getting down into the homeostasis a bit again, because some things are coming back again that we've figured how we can distance somewhat. We wear our masks, we have our hand sanitizers. But for those who have someone who's ill, or they've had COVID themselves, and they're not sure, could they still transmit it? We're not sure. We have some testing going on. I guess if you're testing positive, you can transmit it. And if you have the antibody, you can't. But I don't know that we're 100% sure. So all this fight, flight, and freeze is just kind of rolling around in your client's brain, and maybe also you may be experiencing as well. So after survival, then the brain, it wants the homeostasis, it wants the balance, it wants the happy neurons, and it knows how to do that given the right frame and focus. And this is what we talk about in Brainspotting. We have what we call a dual attunement frame that's relationally the therapist and the client, that being number one, and then the brain spot that we will find. And oftentimes we find it with a telescoping pointer like this, and the client is on the brain spot that has the resonant feel to the issue or the trauma or the difficulty that they are working with. And this is informed by what they're feeling in their body. And then we have a SUD scale, subjective units of disturbance, that goes from 10, the highest, we couldn't stand to feel anymore, to 0, it's gone. If they can tell us these things, they then are guided by that sensing of where they find that point. So that's a little bit about Brainspotting for people that have not experienced it before. And so the brain with homeostasis, with our framing and focusing with Brainspotting, we oftentimes find that clients within a session or a few sessions can find some homeostasis. And even in this era of COVID, where things are very difficult, kind of ever-changing, and everything else that's going on in their life, and why they were coming to therapy in the first place. And then the brain wants restoration, that very deep state of whether we meditate or do yoga, and the ways the brain knows to just get to a point where I think of it like the factory. The workers have gone home, the lights are going out, the machines are quiet, but the factory's still there, the electricity's still on. It's running at a level where it's restoring itself. So certainly when we go into sleep and into REM sleep and other states of consciousness we have. But I think it's real important remembering this about survival, homeostasis, and restoration, and teaching that to clients can help them to see what state am I in and whether there's something that they can do about that in the moment based on the work they've done with you and other interests of theirs. Even sometimes David will say just distraction, reading a book or watching a movie or maybe watching a TV series you've seen 2 or 3 times, but it calms you down or it makes you laugh, and so you watch that. All of these things can be helpful for clients in this very disruptive time. So we're going to look a little bit at the architecture, the geography, and some of the functionality of the brain. So I'm going to use my little cursor here. So here we're looking at the left hemisphere of the brain. And if you see me up here, I have my little brain model. And if we go this way, right down the middle, and separate the 2 halves, what we're looking at on the slide now is one of the halves, the left half, and it's what's called a lateral view. It's on the outside of the brain. And here's where the eyes would be, looking out this way to your left. So this in blue is the temporal lobe, and we'll be looking at the area of the brain that thinks and talks and has executive function, and that only has one indirect connection down to our alarm centers that are getting very much tripped off and triggered in this era of COVID and with losses. And when someone has died or passed, when something has greatly changed in our lives, this is not the job of this area of the brain. But we'll talk about these areas down here and underneath. I have another slide to show that better. And we have premotor and motor cortex here, and going into then what we call sensory cortex, everything we feel when we're touching or when we have pain or it's too warm or too cold. It's coming up from the body, from the spine, through the brainstem, up to the thalamus, which is like a hub that gives the direction of where in the brain. Think of the hub like the post office, or what we call in the US snail mail, when you put a letter in the mailbox. All the letters from the body go up the spine with the mail person, the mailman, the mailwoman, and go to the post office, the thalamus, and then is directed on. And here, that goes to the sensory cortex. In this area, parietal lobe has a lot to do with spatial, our sense of ourselves in space. And this is the occipital lobe. So for brain spotters, here's our visual cortex. So when we're seeing, it's coming back to this part of our brain, and actually it's reversed, it's upside down. And then this is the temporal lobe. This is an interesting lobe. On the left side, we have Wernicke's and Broca's areas, and what those are speech centers for receptive language, what we hear and then understand, and expressive language as we speak and initiate speech or respond to someone who's talked to us or asked us a question. And this part of the brain works very much with that part here that has the executive function, rational, analytical, plans, goals, decisions. They work together. And what we find is, while it's good to have some of this in our therapy, certainly with brain spotting therapy, once we get on that brain spot, we are minimal with these areas of the brain. And now we're going to rely on the subcortical brain to help bring the brain into that homeostasis. This is beginning that frame and focus to help the brain find that second thing it wants, and even hopefully maybe get down into the third, the restoration. And here is our cerebellum. We won't talk too much about that, but that has to do with balance and also sequencing. And it's interesting, I just learned that sequencing also with the thinking brain, so that if someone has a stroke here in the cerebellum, it's possible that they lose the sense of, I do this, then I do that. Someone might put on their shoes and then try to pull the sock over the shoe. Something that is done in a sequence may be challenged and need therapy to have that hopefully come back. So another view, this is called a sagittal view. So it's the same cut. If you see me again with my model of the brain coming this way down vertically, and it's dividing the two hemispheres in perfect halves, the left and right. And now we're looking at the right hemisphere. So we're looking at the inside of the brain. And here would be the eyes here looking out this way to your left. So here we have, this is called a sagittal view. Just so you know, there's different cuts of the brain that give different views. Just, you may hear this terminology. You don't have to try to remember it, but just so you have some conversancy with it. So here's our frontal lobe again, and these areas we'll see in a moment in a slide of Damir's, very important. Here's where the regulation comes from in this area, dense connections to our alarm systems that we'll see, the amygdala and a couple of other areas. So that's their job, dense neural connections to those parts of the brain that are deciding, is this life-threatening? Is this safe? Is it not safe? And then again, here's our parietal lobe and our occipital with vision, our cerebellum, and the temporal lobe just peeking out here. And here's the brainstem, and we'll have much better views of this, but I just want to teach a little piece now. This is the midbrain at the top. A lot of people think this, as I'm circling around here, is the midbrain, and that makes a lot of sense because it's in the middle of the brain, but it's not. This is the limbic system, or the mammalian brain, and limbus means ring. So there's like a ring around this area, limbic system, or mammalian brain, and this is the midbrain. We're going to talk a lot about this at the top of the brainstem, comprised of the midbrain, the pons, which is this roundish part, which means bridge, and it bridges over to that cerebellum, and then the medulla that will then connect to the spine. So now we're going to look a little more specifically. Here's that part of the brain that has executive function. So it's the left hemisphere executor. All of our conscious thoughts, plans, goals, and understanding consequences. And this is interesting. In the US, our driving, our car insurance for young men is very high under the age of 25, because it would appear that the connections, the synaptic connections, are not completely made in that age group for young men to this part of the brain. And particularly important is, if I do this, then that, they have trouble making that connection. If I have a couple drinks, well, I had some food, I can get in the car. They're not thinking, oh, what might my blood alcohol level be? Possibly. And some are thinking that, but there is maybe some possibility of risky behavior. Whoops, now I don't know how to go back. So I went, let's see, how do I get my slide back the other way? Good. We say in brain spotting that this part of the brain is highly overrated because it could make up stories and it wants to fill in wherever there's kind of a gap, even if it's not true. We like to have this part of our brain working very well with the other parts of our brain, but we like to focus in on the subcortical brain. And for people that are grieving, the subcortical part of their brain is what is in high operation. They may find this part of their brain, the thinking, the intellectual, the understanding, greatly challenged. And it's because it tends to be taken offline when the subcortical brain says, ooh, there's something I really need to attend to. It's like, you can go in the back room, thinking brain, we don't need you as much. We need more survival mode. So I made, again, one of my attempts at a funny little thing. So I don't know if you can read under my screen sharing thing here, but it says only one, as I said before, indirect connection from the prefrontal cortex to the alarm centers. And I've called him Cortical Carl in the driver's seat. And so if it's an indirect connection, here I have Amy G. Dalla, amygdala. So she's having a tough time, and the fact that Carl's gonna make a stop before he can get to her, our poor little amygdala is left alone, and it needs the part of the brain that knows how to help regulate and to help well reality test whether we should get some survival programs going or not. So here we are, and I forgot to mention this DL, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. There are so many terms that it's like, oh, why do they have to say these things? These words are too hard. So dorsal means the top. So we got the top and we got the bottom. And ventral, here's ventral, means the bottom. So this would be the bottom of that frontal lobe. And this is the top portion. So dorsal and lateral. Top and side is our thinking, conscious, understanding consequences part of our brain that has only the one indirect connection, leaving poor amygdala there alone by herself, as it has an indirect connection to get there. But this part gets to the amygdala right away. What can I do, Amy? What can I do to help you? And ventral and medial means, ventral again is bottom, and medial is like, here I am again with my brain up at the top, the inside, that slide we saw with the inside of the brain. It's right in here, and you're going to see more of the parts of the brain that's their job, is to regulate. So this is one of Damir's slides, and this is the one that you will have. If you don't have it here, I put it again later, because we're going to talk about it a couple of times. So what is involved in regulation of these alarm centers in our brain is this part of the brain that's in the middle and at the bottom. So it's called the agranular isocortex. Now this is a term from Damir. It's a little big of a term, but what it means is it's missing a granular layer. In this area of the brain, there's less than 6 layers. In this NeoCortex or granular isocortex that we looked at the first slide, the lateral view of the brain, that's 6 layers everywhere, and there's a granular layer. And the thing about that granular layer is it's taking in all the information from that thalamus that's come up from the body, from our visceral sensing. It's bringing in the senses, and it's bringing it into that particular area that then, in those 6 layers, the computations are made for our thinking and figuring out and rationalizing. And so that's what that area needs with that 4th layer that this area doesn't need. So it doesn't have the granular, and it's called granular because it looks like little grains of sand, little granular pieces of neurons in the brain. So the agranular, without granular, isocortex, and a part of the older cortex, older cortex over here, that's what helps these parts of the brain, the alarm centers. So the names of these parts, and again, you don't really need to remember it, but it's just kind of nice to know, is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The OFC is the orbital frontal cortex, and these initials will be spelled out later. And that's behind the orbits of the eyes. And the anterior front cingulate cortex, this little thing right here. And this is the corpus callosum, and this is looking frontward in the brain. So it's right at the front, and they're all near each other. And Damir talks about the brain wants the smallest space. It's very brilliant and wants to conserve space and energy, and it wants the shortest distance for things to communicate with each other that are involved with each other. So here we have these areas nicely compacted together to do their job to regulate the amygdala that I'm sure you've heard of. That is an assessor. There is a misconception that that there is fear or emotions felt in the amygdala. The amygdala doesn't feel, it assesses. It's kind of like the accountant. So the accountant has got all the stuff you've brought in from your taxes and your bank and your money, and he looks at it and he decides, you know, what gets distributed to which funds and where those things go, and based on what your life is and your history and what your plans are for the future. And this is kind of what the amygdala does. It assesses, and it's the only assessor online from birth to age 3, because we don't have the conscious part of the brain. Only 30% of the conscious brain, that part on the left side we were looking at, is around when the baby is born. So 70% gets developed over the time of our lifespan. And part of the limbic system is developed, but not all of it. But 100% of the brainstem is up and running, because that's our reflexive heart rate, breathing, and other functions for the body. So Damir says that this possibly is because we have to be able to fit into the culture and the era in which we're born. So this is the brilliance of evolution and our brain. And hopefully that all goes well. So when we look a little bit at attachment, and does our family, is there nice, good attachment and good reality testing with what is safe and warm and not so good and really dangerous in the world? Or is the family of origin the place where it's dangerous? And the child's brain literally gets configured, both functionally and chemically, to survive in that family, such that its reality testing may not be that good with what it feels coming in from the world. So that child who then grows up to be that adult, adults that have had developmental trauma, when they come to us, and in this era of COVID, they may be experiencing where they maybe have done very well before, they're doing very well in their therapy, a lot of regression back, great difficulties, whether flashbacks, or David has said some of them, he has found some of his people who've had developmental trauma are actually saying, I know this, I grew up with this, everything's upside down, you don't know what's going on, I've got a leg up on everyone else, I've got an advantage over everyone else. So when we're looking at these centers, we're thinking, these alarm centers, how is this particular client's alarm center and regulation centers developed? What was their history? As David says on 9/11, how you reacted and then how you were is based on who you were on 9/10 and every day before. So we bring our history, of course, and who we are and how our brains very individually develop. And there are 4 quadrillion possible synaptic connections in the brain at any given moment. So how can we possibly know what's going on in our client's brain? We want to be open to them. We want to follow them. We have a saying of being in the tail of the comet with our clients. So as we're looking at these parts of the brain, I'm thinking about these things, about the way that I'm working with my client and how the client's brain might be functioning. So if the amygdala gets tripped off, and we'll see how that can happen, what it does then is gets in touch with the hypothalamus, and that has a chain of events. And in the brainstem, where we saw that midbrain at the top, this little PAG, periaqueductal gray, again, don't worry, we're going to see a lot about this. This is where our survival programs are housed. So these parts of the brain, if it is deemed dangerous enough or uncertain enough, they are going to start programs to help us try to cope with the situation. So again, what is the reality testing? And it's hard to have a good reality testing with the kind of feelings and the kind of losses and the way the losses are happening with COVID in this world. So there's a lot of activity in this area of the brain, I think, these days. So this is just another slide. I also like the work of Bonnie Badenoch, you see here. She has a book being a brain-wise therapist. And she will talk about these areas just a little differently, but it's the same areas that Damir talks about. So this is her slide for that. This area that does regulation, dense connections to the alarm centers. So here I've just spelled out the ventromedial, remember bottom and inside, ventral medial prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, and in fact, that is the executor on the right side of the brain. Whoops, here I go again. Of the right hemisphere, and that has a lot to do with social cues, social understanding. So this can be an area that's changed for, challenging rather, for people on the spectrum. So if you have people on the spectrum of autism, Asperger's, this can be a challenging time, and this can be an area where they have challenges that it may not work as readily as well as maybe someone else's brain does. So that's just another look at this and just introducing her work to you. So next, looking again, just what is this area doing with regulation? Well, attentional, emotional, affective, integrational processes. So this is very challenged in today's world where things are so different with COVID and the many changes that we're seeing. The calming and self-soothing can feel almost impossible for some clients. One of the things we do in Brainspotting, and I have a little exercise on body resource here that I'll see if we might get a little bit of time to do together. And I have a podcast on it that I did for self-soothing based on somewhere in the body that is calm and maybe even just neutral, despite the fact that other parts of us feel something that is not calm or is disturbing, painful, whatever it may be. And then emotional regulation. All of these are very difficult in this era, but these middle prefrontal circuits, those are the areas that we believe and we theorize we're getting to with the Brainspotting work. And our alarm system, just looking a little more, again, I just think it's so helpful to see where these things are, because you hear about them and then it's like, well, where are they? And I think it just sticks a little better if we see some different views of them. So here we are in the limbic system is our amygdala, and that's this little pink thing here. And then the hypothalamus is here. Remember, the smallest area and the closest to each other that are working together. And then we'll see later the hippocampus is here. And then in the brainstem, that periaqueductal gray in the midbrain, that's over on the side here. Here's our midbrain in this slide. Whoops. And this can be helpful for clients. And I'll stop right after this for some questions. The hand model of the triune brain. This is Dan Siegel's, and Bonnie Badenoch has a big section in her book on it. You can show your client, you know, it's great to have one of these brain models. And when they are in your office, when we do go back to that, they can open it up and they can look at it and explore it, and it makes it kind of tactile and real. And with their hands, it can be like, what's two halves of the brain? And here would be the brain stem and the spine. And this would be our limbic system, our thumb. And then here is our NeoCortex, and whoops, here is our, underneath here, those are those middle prefrontal circuits. So in some ways, this can be a way with the body. If they say, I don't know, you know, what I'm feeling or whatever, you can say, can you just show me like how kind of off center, or how the word dysregulated may be too fancy of a word, but how off or how difficult does it feel? Is it, this is totally flipped your lid, oh my gosh, couldn't be any worse, and here is nice and cozy, everything's good. And they can show you rather than with numbers. Well, it's about here. And then you can say, just take some time and watch where their eyes go. That's what we call a gaze spot. Watch where their eyes go while they slowly, slowly see if they can bring this down over the poor amygdala left on its own to fend without help of these circuits. So that's kind of a fun thing to have to use, that we've all got it. So, okay, I'm ready. I'm seeing you're waving. Or you're doing, yeah, good. You're doing, Adit is doing some of this. So if there are some questions, I'm happy to take them. I'm hoping things are understandable.
I haven't seen any question about it at this moment. I think people
Okay,
still, yeah, start to understanding about the brain.
okay, wonderful. We've got a very smart group. That's good.
Also,
Okay,
you explain it quite nice, so it's fun.
okay,
So I'm good
thank
at
you.
this.
Yes, yes, I think this can be a wonderful thing to use with clients, and you can teach them with their kids too. Their
Mhm.
kids, it's like, honey, you're here. We need you to get maybe here. Couldn't you maybe go here? What would you need? I need Lambo. My sister-in-law's been telling me about a little child that she's been babysitting, and Lambo is his little stuffed animal. And if he's going somewhere new, he's got to have Lambo with him. So Lambo helps him get like this. So this can be something great to use for kids. And just a reminder to everybody that Martha Jacoby in the US and, excuse me, Monica Baumann in
Mhm.
Austria have a training on children and teens. So that's a very good resource for, more about, grieving and how to work with children. So I
Monica.
want to get a little plug in there for them. Okay, so
Mhm.
I'll push on.
So, well, I'm gonna ask
Oh,
just,
sure.
is there any question for people? You can open your microphone, but just one question probably. We'll wait for anyone. Okay, I think there's,
Okay.
just go on.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so there are many more grief resources than this, but I'm just boiling it down to a little bit of what, since there are a lot of brain spotters here. In The Power of Brain Spotting, I have a chapter on grief, and I'm telling you, gaze spotting. I mean, I just feel like to sit with someone and see where their eyes go. And if they do want to talk and they want to tell you about what it is they're losing, or that they've lost their loved one who is in hospice or is passing or has died. And maybe when we speak, it might be to say, tell me some more about them, what they were like, what your time together, if you like. And that we just let them be on the gaze spot. And we can, though, if it's appropriate, and if they seem to be at a point where maybe they've been looking at one place constantly, or they've just sort of been gazing over, we can ask them, as we do with gaze spotting, gee, I noticed you've been looking over here. And if they know brain spotting, and they'll say, oh yeah, there I was, just spend some time there. But if they're newer, we can say there's a way of working with brain spotting where your eyes go naturally. It's kind of a gentler and easier place to work on the very difficult things, or just to be with the feelings you're having around having just lost your dad. And as you were talking about him, I noticed your eyes were there. And either they'll say, oh, yes. And if they don't know where it is, you can say, oh, it's over to your left a bit. And just in that area, if they can get there, that's fine. And you can say, if you're just there for 1 minute and just see how you feel, notice your body, see what comes next and comes next. You just don't have to try to do anything. It just kind of works that way. And then after the minute, you check in with them to see how was that. And then you extend it to 2 minutes. So you're kind of really with them until then they get that feeling of, oh yeah, that's pretty good when I'm on that spot. And, I'm sort of going wherever. Or they're also feeling, gee, I'm feeling better. Because it seems to be, we've got these couple theories about the brain. One from Frank Corrigan about the superior colliculus, and a fast track from the retina to this part of the brain, which is in the midbrain, that holds us in a part in the brain that is very important. We'll see later in the work of Jack Panksepp. He says we've got to have the midbrain engaged engaged to see the kind of deep healing and neuroplasticity in the brain that we want therapeutically. So we're theorizing because we haven't been able to see it on imaging. We haven't done that yet. Do we have connection there? But with that gaze in that place, the superior colliculus has to do with orienting. So our eyes go, and then our head and neck and shoulder. And then there's the brain spot. So I talk a lot about gaze spotting. At the end of the presentation, I'll give a few other brain spotting setups I think could be helpful, but it's that sense of being with someone. Maybe they just, you know, have not been able to be with people, you know, during their loss in this era of COVID. And even though we're on screen with them, if we are, I don't know if you're seeing people in person yet, but are just being with them. And it's like in the Jewish tradition, in a way, sitting Shiva. You know, after they have the funeral, they will then sit for a period of time. Sometimes it's as many as 7 days, and people come and bring food, and they sit with. And maybe they, of course, talk about the person who passed, but the being with. And this is the thing in brain spotting, the relationship. And here's where I'm going to give you a funny Davidism. He said, when you think it's in the tools, go back to relationship. Relationship, relationship, relationship. I could say it 100 times. I'll only say it 36 times. Now, I don't know if you find that funny, but we were in Amsterdam, Enya and Adit, we were in Amsterdam in March of 2017, and it was just that New York kind of thing, you know, I'll only say it 36 times. Honestly, I thought I'd have to leave the room. Just knowing David the way I do, he can be so funny, and he can do very good imitations. When you meet David, ask him to do an imitation of someone for you. He has a wonderful sense of humor. And I think we need that, you know, in these times. We need to have some lightness. And even with our clients, when it's possible to have some lightness. So also what I'm recommending very much, I mean, the whole book is wonderful, but particularly with grief, is grounding. Cynthia Schwartzberg has a wonderful chapter on grounding that maybe our clients do need a little assistance of. They may feel like, I feel like I'm kind of floating in space. You know, they're not kind of feeling themselves in their bodies or feeling connected. And just simple things like, do you feel your feet on the ground? And can you just put your attention there? So that's getting those attentional networks. Remember we saw in that slide, those middle prefrontal circuits? When we get those attentional networks, we're getting a little whoop, a little hit in those middle prefrontal circuits, regulating, oh yeah, I'm feeling my feet. They're pretty calm, you know, and I feel the floor. Yep. And now can you feel how you're sitting in the chair, however they are, that you don't have to effort to hold yourself up. The chair's got you. It's got your back. It's got the back of your legs, and you just spend some time. Or you can do some of the heart rate variability. Santiago Brand does this with the breath in, and they're watching a wave on a screen, and then the breath out as they see that little wave go down. Breath in and breath out slowly, about 6 to 7 breaths a minute. He says there are apps that you can get for your phone. And he had a very good presentation on heart rate variability that you can find on the Brain Spotting Practitioners page. He did this for the people in Slovenia. So I think some of the Slovenian brain spotting therapists are with us. And I watched that presentation, and he gave 3 different ways of doing the breath to help the brainstem calm down, because the brain is just, and the breathing is just happening in a way that may be reminiscent of the trauma the person's going through. And David, quote, likes this to be going on for a brain spotting session, that it may encapsulate that traumatic moment very well, the way they're breathing. But if they're having trouble balancing in this difficult time, it's okay to work with the breath some and teach them that they can bring that home with them. So Cynthia's chapter is really wonderful. And then this self-spotting body resource exercise, if we can just take just a couple minutes, and if you don't want to do it, please don't do anything you don't want to do. But this is something you can do with your clients, and they don't have to be activated. Maybe they are, but we're really putting the focus, just like we do in body resource, where we find a place in the body, calm, grounded, centered. So what you do is teach them this little piece that they can take home with themselves. Maybe you even record your voice doing this beginning piece, and then they're on the brain spot they find and just take time there. So I'll just read it through what it is, and then I'll just do a mini guided in it that we'll do together. And hopefully that'll give people just a little brain spotting experience who aren't brain spotting therapists, and those that are, after all this listening and brain stuff and oh my goodness, get a little, a little break. So we look for, even though we might be stirred up and having a lot of feelings, where anywhere in the body is calm, grounded, centered, or if we can't find that, maybe it's just neutral. Or if we can't find that, one of my people who's just become certified, who I did their certification, one of my wonderful colleagues, it calls it the less bad place. And that sometimes gets a little smile from people. And they know what the less bad place is. So if they can find that, can be anywhere, the tip of their nose, you can, guide them a little bit with that, the tip of their ear, if they're having trouble finding it, their toe, deep in inner space in their thigh, it could be anywhere. Then once they have that, they're going to look to one side, and they'll pick the side, then the center, and then the other side. And I'm saying this lately, picking the side, because I'm being very aware of language, and David is very aware of language and of being in the tail of the comet, following the client. When we say, look to your left, we're giving a direction. Their orienting may be when they hear, choose a side, their brain and body is going to choose. Some people are going to go to the left to start, some are going to go to the right. I think it has significance. So just ask them to look to one side, wherever they look, and for a little bit, then they look to the center, then the other side, to see which area, which third of the visual space has that resonant feel to what's feeling better. And then they can move their eyes horizontally, or they can just move their eyes around the space. If they're at home, their eyes may go to an object, a vase, or a little clock, or something that they focus on. And then that spot is where they just see where they go and where they go next and where they go next. They don't have to keep thinking about the resource place in their body. They just see where they go, and they take as long as they like. So can we maybe try this together just to do a little bit? And I'm not going to let you go on the spot too long, just because we don't have a lot of time together. Is that all right? Are people, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so just take a minute to get comfortable in your chair or on your couch or wherever you are. And we're just going to bring your attention to see if you can find somewhere on or in your body that would be calm, grounded, centered, or maybe neutral, or maybe just feels a little better, that less bad place, depending on how you're feeling. Let's take a little time to find that. And then once you do, taking your time, you can just look to one side. And then when you feel ready, you can look to the center. And again, your own timing, when you're ready, to the other side. And just see which area and visual space draws you more with that better feeling, calm, grounded, centered, or neutral, or just better place. And you can either move your eyes horizontally along that area, that you're looking at, or just look around that area, up a bit, down a bit, and see what has the strongest feeling of that sweet spot, what feels good, that resonance to that place in your body that you found. And then I'm just going to give you a couple minutes, just see where you go. Just let it be automatic. Just see where you go. Okay, and so when you can, just either close your eyes or come off the spot, as we have limited time. And let's just check in now to see if there's anybody who would like to say anything about this or has any question about it. I think we can move on then.
Okay. Do you want to move on, or do you want to have a 3-minute breaks?
A
Maybe?
little through. How about we take, since we did this, yeah, a little, just quick little bathroom or get some water break, just to give ourselves a little break. And after doing something more internal than charging into the material right away. So I'll meet you back here in 3 to 5 minutes.